In this video, we will help you to understand if you need to cycle caffeine. Tolerance to caffeine is quite unique in the sense that it isn't a mere increase the dose to get the same effects reaction. Caffeine can act differently in somebody known as caffeine naive, meaning infrequent user, and caffeine tolerant people. This means that cycling caffeine needs to be a choice specific for each person. First, let's see when cycling is not needed. If you are consuming caffeine for disease prevention, such as risk reduction of Parkinson's disease or of type 2 diabetes, then you don't need to cycle caffeine. Actually, it is probably recommended to keep chronic coffee or tea intake for diabetes risk reduction, as the negative effects on glucose metabolism by caffeine are reduced with tolerance. Caffeine is also used in sports sometimes. While the short-term stimulation of caffeine is something that will need to be cycled to preserve, the general benefit of caffeine seems to persist when it comes to cardiovascular exercise, regardless of whether you are tolerant to its stimulation or not. If you're using caffeine to reduce blood in the brain in order to mitigate headaches, then there's no need to cycle your intake because the impact on blood pressure is the same even if you're tolerant to the stimulation effect. Now, when is cycling recommended? Caffeine is usually used for its adrenaline reactions like increased focus, fat burning, and appetite suppression. Increased focus should not be confused with wakefulness, which is an adenosine receptor reaction and not attenuated with tolerance. In these cases, cycling caffeine is usually recommended. This is partially due to a reduced secretion of adrenaline in response to caffeine, but also due to a reduced amount of adrenergic receptors in a state of caffeine tolerance. It should also be noted that the adverse effects of adrenaline, such as the increases in blood pressure and heart rate, will be preserved even if you successfully cycle caffeine intake. Before we dive into the situations when cycling caffeine intake is required, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're curious about science applied to health issues, and hit that bell icon so you receive the notifications every time we upload a new video. Finally, let's see when cycling is absolutely a requirement. Cycling is needed when caffeine intake affects dopamine signaling in the brain. When tolerance develops with prolonged caffeine usage, these effects quite literally disappear. It is known as an insurmountable tolerance, in which rather than a dose-response curve shifting to the right, it instead gets flattened. The effects that are mediated by dopaminergic signaling are locomotion and euphoria. Euphoria should not be confused with a mere greater well-being, which can still happen in the absence of euphoria. Summarizing, there are benefits associated with chronic caffeine consumption, and there are benefits associated with acute caffeine consumption that fades with tolerance. If you like the latter, cycling is mandatory. If you like the former, cycling is not needed.
Please note this video is our interpretation of scientific papers. It is merely informative and doesn't constitute any form of advice. If you have any health issues or concerns, please contact your physician or licensed health professional.